we take the next step, let's make sure that we got it right. Because, once you start embarking on some significant change, there's going to be significant cost.
Right.
And, you don't want to go down that path and have to undo that work.
That's right. And I think just like with any organization, and I guess feedback that I would provide anybody, wanting to walk a mile in any, quite frankly, in any role is when you transition from one organization to the next, don't keep referring back to your previous ones when you're there, right? Like, well, we did it this way at insert company. I mean, maybe you can do that once or twice, right? But if you become that broken record, they're like, well, you're not at that company, you're here. So what are we
Right.
going to do?
Right.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper, CEO and Managing Partner at Sapient Insights Group. And I'm back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we like to break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day. We help you make sense of what they mean, and we talk about what you might do about them. Joining me today is Jen Congdon. Jen has over 20 years of global experience in senior level HR roles. She's founded her own consulting firm specializing in coaching and strategy and change and continuous improvement and all sorts of HR related topics. She serves on some boards, and she is currently the CHRO at M Financial Group. Woo, it's a lot. Welcome, Jen. Excited to chat with you today.
Hey, Terry, happy to be here.
You've got quite an impressive resume, and I noticed spent time in some big industries like tech and aerospace and manufacturing, and even some smaller ones in renewables and financials. I was hoping that we would talk today about your journey in HR for people that have similar ambitions, and also talk about some of the things that you're passionate about, like what you learned and took from industry and to industry and reapplied some of the learnings and improvements that you took from place to place. Does that sound like a good plan to you?
Yeah, no, that sounds great. That sounds terrific.
Awesome. Then let's get into the huddle. So first things first, I did a little bit of a flyby on your background. You've done a lot. So maybe you could add a little more color to your 20 plus year journey and kind of what brought you here where you are today.
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy to do that. I've been very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work for some really interesting companies over my entire career. And quite frankly, when I graduated college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew when I was 5, I wanted to play basketball in college. Check, did that. Right. So got that accomplished. But then I ended up being a communications major and mass communications, telecom, and really was thinking about, hey, let's go into TV, let's do all the behind the scenes productions, and then you realize how much that pays, and you're like, maybe not, let's not do that. Right. And so, I've lived all over the US, and I would say kind of I stepped into HR through a temp agency early in my career, not knowing anything about it, and kind of in a bit of an office manager role, and had a recruiting director that took me under their wing and taught me all things recruiting. And I saw really quickly that there's this really interesting parallel between communications and recruiting, because doing a lot of journalism classes, right, you're asking questions to get to the point of truth. And that has carried with me throughout my entire career, because everything we do in HR, really, if you think about it, it kind of boils down to asking questions to get to the point of truth, be it investigations, be it recruitment, strategy, all the different facets of it. And so I found,
Yeah.
while I didn't know what I wanted to be when I was young, I found that, man, I made a good choice, right? And doing
Yeah.
that patient's perspective.
That's interesting. Communications and marketing. I've had a few marketing leaders on the call over the last year and talking about the connection with HR and just how integrated they need to be, because there's a lot of opportunity there and a lot of synergies between those two groups to make both of these areas really powerful, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and so fast forward a little bit and talking about some of the bigger companies that I had a chance to work for, and a lot of throughout my career, people have taken risks and opportunities and thrown some things my way and just said, all right, let's see if she can do this, right? And so being hungry and wanting to learn and absorb, I think really helped me a lot. But I worked at Cisco Systems in early 2000, where the big boom was
Yeah.
happening. And that was also when Cisco was really kind of cutting edge on centers of excellence and really kind of framing what that looked like in HR. And so, I was fortunate to be there at that point in time where, from an HR perspective, they were very creative, out of the box thinking. And couple that with, after I left Cisco, I went to Honeywell and Honeywell Aerospace, which was all about process excellence. So, I had this creative, out of the box process excellence. I'm like, man, imagine what you can do in HR if you can think outside the box and make it into a sustainable process that adds value to the organization. And so I've really been able to kind of marry the two of those together throughout the rest of my career, even after I left Honeywell.
Yeah, Cisco was one of those interesting companies back in the day. I remember they were one of my first ever like stock purchases. Like I just owned some Cisco stock and I was like, wow, this is really cool. That's changed a lot over the years, but there are some differences between organizations. And I think, you can take experiences from one place to the next, but they end up getting, tweaked to match the industry. As somebody who's been in some very large organizations, what was different walking into, because now you're in a much smaller organization, right? Different industry.
Right. Yeah. What's been kind of interesting, most of my background has been global industrial manufacturing, right? With the exception of my stint at Cisco, my 4-year stint at Cisco, the rest of it's been very global, very heavy industrial manufacturing. Even on the aerospace side, right? It was still training, a lot of it was aftermarket services. Part of it was down with the guidance and electrical systems and all these different pieces. But then fast forward to pure play water with Xylem and with Watts, all of these massive pieces of equipment and machinery, right, that we're using. And I was looking for another global industrial manufacturing type of role. I wasn't even entertaining the financial services space. I'm like, what is this? A friend reached out to me. They're like, hey, you should talk to the CEO at M. I think you'll really like him. I'm like, what's the industry? I'm like, do you know me? Right? Didn't we talk about global industrial?
Sounds like something in the James Bond movie or something. Talk to him.
Oh, right. And so, but I did. So I'm like, absolutely, I'll have a conversation with him, and we hit it off. I mean, he's a great CEO. I really enjoy working with him, and one of the things that he was looking for was bringing someone in that did have different experiences coming from outside of professional services, because we, having a background that has more kind of process orientation and continuous improvement and lean can apply to any industry, right?
Yeah.
So he was definitely looking for some of that. And I just I liked the people. I'm like, it took me a minute to figure out, okay, so what's the product that we're doing? And I'm still learning a lot of the language, and because it's insurance, reinsurance, wealth management. And so it's a completely different space. But I was finally able to quantify it with, like, it's not a widget, right? Like this, it's more like this piece of paper, but you still start with an order, right? It comes through, it does all the things it needs to do, and you deliver the end product, right? It just isn't in the form of a widget, right?
Yeah, it's very different. I've almost mostly, except for some of my early days, been in careers where the product is somewhat intangible, right? It's consulting or, advisory. We do have a product now with our survey, which is very different. It's like, okay, how do we package that? Because that's not how I'm usually talking about things. But HR can be, and you said this in your early discussion, like, how do you get outside the box? Like, so much of HR for many years had been kind of in a box, right? Like, well, we do compliance and, we do recruiting, and these are the things we do within our box. And, that's changed dramatically over the last 20 years. And a lot of smaller companies now are saying, let's not get too far down the path of just managing HR before we decide that we're going to focus on people. rather than just doing the HR stuff, right? So that, that's interesting. I don't know how many employees you guys have.
So M is, I mean, we're not huge as far as internal number of employees. We've got around 300 people that are internal to M, but then we have all of our member firms that we support, right? And they have like another 2,000 or so across probably in total across all of them. And you would hear our CEO even say, we're in the people business, right? As part of what we're doing. And so, if we think about our vision and values that we bring to play for our member firms, right? How do we help them succeed and thrive, right? The same thing applies to our employees. What are we doing to help them do the same thing so they can provide that elite type of service?
Yeah. So what did your first 90 days look like, sort of coming out of the honeymoon phase? And, I'm sure you like set some goals for yourself, but also like there were some objectives that, your CEO had in mind. And was there an HR strategy, or was that something that was part of what you needed to build?
It was part of what I needed to build. It definitely was part of what I needed to build. And HR at M is it's a little different because not only do I have HR, I have facilities, and then marketing and events also rolls up into HR at M. And these are large industry-wide events, but I've got a fabulous leader that's over that business. I got a great leader that's over our facilities part. So being able to kind of help coordinate and tie all that together for what we call people experience. Has been a lot of fun. But my first 90 days, I went on my listening tour, right? Talked to all the different leaders, really kind of understanding, and even more so because I know a lot of acronyms, but I knew none in this space. Right?
Things that there's a lot of them. There's a lot.
There's a lot of acronyms. And so, you make quick relationships with your peers on the leadership team. And I'll sit next to a couple of them, like writing down on a piece of paper, like the acronym. I'm like, what is this? What is this? And they're like, what this is. And they're still really great about that because I still don't know all of them, but everybody's been really receptive of, all right, let's think about what we can do different, and how do we onboard someone more quickly. Within my first 30 days, we had our first board meeting. So I was working board content and things for the compensation committee, and kind of sharing my initial impressions over the first 30 days. And, then met with the HR team. We did a strategy session coming off of our leadership strategy session of, okay, so this is what we're trying to do from an organization. So how are we going to best support that? Because doing things in isolation, it's nice to do what you like to do, but is it adding any value? Right.
Yeah. And you have a little bit of an advantage in a smaller company to get people, on the train before they get too far down the path. But
absolutely. I'm fortunate with the HR team here too, that they're really hungry to learn new tools and to learn new things. So that was a huge, huge advantage for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And you guys are back in the office, right? Do you have people that work remotely or work in other
cities? We do. We've got, we're probably maybe 20-25% that are in the field, but they're also those employees. Most of those employees are actually supporting our member firm in those spaces.
Right.
But we have two main locations. One is in Dallas and the other's in Portland, Oregon. And so, we are in the office in Dallas 4 days a week. We're in the office in Portland 3 days a week, and we're navigating that sticky wicket.
Yeah, that's still a big topic for CHROs and HR leaders and CEOs as well. I mean, I think sometimes that gets placed at the feet of HR, but the reality is it's a company-wide challenge that needs to be dealt with at the C-level.
Right. And we really want to create this. We really want to create an in-office culture. Yeah. Right. And I mean, we've got a beautiful brand new facility in the Quad in Dallas. Our Portland office is absolutely stunning as well. And so, I mean, it's a really nice environment, right, to be able to come into the office. And, we continue to look at that, and
I miss
we'll figure it out with the rest of them, right?
Yeah. My home office is fine, but it's the camaraderie. There's just the opportunity, especially if you're younger in your career, there's so much more to be learned by sitting next to people that are doing other jobs or the same job, right? Absolutely. And there's so many little things that I found when we got into the pandemic that I realized people, that were kind of new in business. We had hired a few interns and some people just coming out of college, and there were just basic things that they didn't learn because they weren't sitting in an office. Yeah, so this is very different.
I think it's so important. My nephew he's in his third year right now at UVA and finished up an internship that was in person. He's got a couple more lined up for this coming summer. He actually has one in the summer and one in the fall, and he really loves being in the office with the people that came with, and he's learning a lot more because of it.
Yeah. Were there any particular technology challenges that you encountered coming in? I mean, was there already an HR system in place, or was it just payroll, just kind of managing?
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, we have UKG, so it's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely payroll, we've got that buttoned up, right? And that's fine. I don't know that we're necessarily leveraging all of the technology as well as we can. And so part of that, as we continue to dig in, is like, okay, what modules do we have? What don't we have? How do we want to work it? And, some of it's clunky, and some of it being the size organization that we are too, we don't have to do everything in a system, although there's definite benefits to being able to do that.
Yeah.
We're consolidating.
The advisory side of me is saying, figure out what you have.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's what we're doing. We're going to optimize. We're going to optimize what we have before we do something else. And really, and it's junk. It just like continuous improvement, right? It's junk in, junk out. So let's clean up what we have.
Yeah.
And then
I'm trying to coin a new word, but it's not a very good one at this point. So I'll figure out what it should be. But people are over-teched at this point. I mean, they've got so much technology, they don't even know what they have.
Right.
And so, I've walked into some organizations where they're like, well, we really need to have a more dynamic way to support our onboarding. And it's like, well, okay, you have this technology. It does onboarding.
Right.
You need to implement it. You need to think about what you need it to do. It's more about the process and the outcome than it is about the tech.
That's right.
There's a good chance the tech is going to support it if you know what you want to get out of it. And if not, then maybe you do need to look at something else.
Right. Yeah. And more of that onboarding, right? The best part of that onboarding is face-to-face interaction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you could certainly use, and I use tools. I certainly do. I leverage technology, as well as I think most of my peers do. And, it's not, I don't want to throw things at a problem. Plus technology is expensive too. And so if you're not, on us, right?
Well, and it's easy to think that tech will fix the problem, right? Well, if we get this software, we'll fix this problem. Right. But yeah, it's you need to really step back from the problem and talk about what you need the outcomes to be.
Absolutely. Well, and that's where you leverage partners, right? So, companies like Sabretooth, right, that does really niche technical recruitment and really kind of some cutting edge. They have some cutting edge tools that they use on their end that we're the risk of the output of that. And so that's great that they've got that tech, and we just get really great candidates, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I know you're only 6 months or so into the new role, but I know one of the things you're passionate about is sort of this idea of continuous improvement. Was there continuous improvement going on, or is that something you sort of brought in and started to operationalize in the business?
I think there is a combination. So, I mean, we have like project management, right? A PMO office that does some, but I definitely have brought some in as well. So like I introduced the HR team to ocean planning and the X matrix that a lot of manufacturing companies are very, very aware of, where you've got your 3 to 5 year strategy. What are you doing in year one? And what are the key actions that you're going to take that will help you hit year one that gets you to 3 to 5? And then the KPIs associated with that, and building out project A3. So what's our project plan, and putting more rigor around that and doing that up front so that you can see where if we're red, that's okay. What are we going to do to solve for that so that we can keep the project on track? And so that's actually been kind of, for me, it's been a lot of fun, and to see my team kind of look at some of these things first a little bit with the deer in the headlights, and then they're like, oh, okay, right, this makes a lot of sense, because it really ties you back to what the strategy is and what the strategy of the business is.
Yeah, you can limp along a little bit more in organizations that, manufacturing and engineering and without those kind of controls and planning, things break down really quickly. In other organizations, it's a little easier to get by without it, but when you have it, you're like, how did I live without this?
Right, exactly. Right? Exactly. And it's just nice. I think our organization's hungry for some process too, right? Because we've done things, and they've done a great job to be where we are today. And it's a great company, but there's, like any organization, there's always opportunity to improve. And I think that, most people feel that every day they're wanting to come in and they want to leave things better today than they did yesterday.
Yeah. What about change management? Is that something that was kind of already part of the culture, or did you find yourself, because I know that's an area that you've focused on, did you find yourself sort of figuring out, okay, how do I embed this concept of, ongoing or agile change management?
Right. It's interesting, and not just at M, but other companies that I've worked with, people like to use the word change management a lot. Hey, we need change management. I'm like, okay, so let's talk about that. What does that mean to you? Right. And so it's no different here. People use the vernacular around, hey, we need to do change management. And I'm like, well, you're not just doing change management, right? It is and it's a process, but you really need to take people through that. And what's the vision for what you're trying to accomplish? Do you have the right team on board? What are you doing to communicate for buy-in? Cotter is spinning in my head. I love Cotter and Cohen in the Heart of Change, and really try to embed that. And it's something that we're definitely building into the processes here. It's not as robust yet, but again, like the PMO office and we're working really well together, and they're excited for some of the tools that we're bringing. I actually even had one of my business leaders that asked me if I could train him on kind of the change management tools, because he wants to use that in his business. So it's nice. It's really nice when you have the pull.
Yeah, no, totally. One of the things that is most critical to me from a change management perspective is understanding and knowing your stakeholders, and also building the right relationships in the organization. The people across the organization at your level, but even, down some levels, are critical to making sure that you get the support you need and can help like you just can't, you're not the driver of change. You could be the driver, but you're not, without the tentacles, right? And the people in the business, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And our L&D team does a nice job of that as they're building out, training and development. They've got what they would call kind of committees throughout, the organization for different purposes, what they use, but it is getting voice of employees at all different levels within the organization to ensure that we're going to get that right buy-in. But building those relationships is really important. And I also think, like, anytime you do any type of change initiative, bring someone in from a completely different group that knows nothing about that process, so they can poke holes in it and ask questions, right? Be really Socratic throughout it, because, part of that is how you learn and make sure that you're that right outcome.
Yeah. We have a tendency to just ask the people in our sphere, and then it's just an echo chamber, right? Like, oh yeah, that sounds great. That'll work really well. And then you get it in front of people and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Exactly. Why do you think we want to do that?
Yeah.
I do think it's really important to play catch. I like to call it playing catch. Maybe that comes from being an athlete, right? It's like, all right, let's go play catch with someone. So if there's something I want to kind of help deploy in our organization, I'll go to, different members of the leadership team that have the largest stakeholder groups. I'm like, all right, I'm thinking about this. How do you think this would come over? Right. Or if we're going to implement a new policy, if we're going to do something, like, what's the feedback that we're going to get? How will your team receive it?
Yeah.
that we should be thinking about differently on this, or should we just, park it, right? Shouldn't do it at all. I found really good relationships with that, and especially so you're not surprising people.
Yeah. Are there any, challenges you've run up against so far, and whether it's industry or size based, that kind of surprised you, or, anything new that you've learned over the last 6 months since you've been in a new industry from an HR perspective?
No, I think the biggest thing is just being, and I don't know if it's something new that I've learned, but it's reinforced the importance of being nimble, right? And really, really being flexible and listen. And, it's a little refreshing in some regards, because I don't know the industry that well, that I can ask any question that I want to ask, and people are really willing to share that knowledge with me, and they're proud of the work that they've done. And so, I'm kind of just being a massive sponge right now, right? But you listen, talk, engage, right, with all of the different employees. And yeah, I don't know that it's significantly different here than some of the other places, but I remember when I worked at Xylem, the CEO had asked me a couple of weeks. She had also worked at Honeywell at one point, and she had asked me, "Hey, what do you think about Xylem, and what was your biggest surprise?" And I'm like, my biggest surprise going there was the fact that what everybody told me during the interview is actually what I found when I got there. So complete transparency. And I love that. I love that type of surprise. Right?
Yeah, that is a good surprise. I mean, it's kind of one of those things when you do, as from a consulting perspective, they, ask you to validate their strategy, and you almost feel like you didn't do the job at the end, because, well, yeah, you hit the nail on the head, right? Like everything right. We learned was, exactly what you said. And I think that sometimes that's just all they need is, did we get it right before we take the next step? Let's make sure that we got it right. Because, once you start embarking on some significant change, there's going to be significant cost. And, right. You don't want to go down that path and have to undo that work.
That's right. And, and I think just like with any organization, and I guess feedback that I would provide anybody, wanting to walk a mile in quite frankly, in any role, is when you transition from one organization to the next, don't keep referring back to your previous ones when you're there, right? Like, well, we did it this way at insert company. I mean, maybe you can do that once or twice, right? But if you become that broken record, they're like, well, you're not at that company, you're here. So what are we going to do?
Right. What are we going to do here? That's great. Love the idea, but how do we adapt it? Or,
exactly.
Or is it even valid here? Right.
Right. No, exactly right. Exactly right.
Are there some things that you saw over the years that you felt like weren't transferable from an HR perspective? I know it's kind of a deep question. Like,
I know.
I'm thinking
like think about that a little bit. No, I think that most of the things were transferable. I think the amount of complexity you would bring or would not bring would be the differentiator. I think most things do port. I really do. But again, you've got to know your organization. You have to know how receptive are they going to be. And some smaller organizations don't need as much, right? Because you have more flexibility to implement change pretty quickly. Whereas larger organizations that are a lot more complex might require a deeper dive in certain areas, right? Where you don't have to go quite as deep.
Yeah. I have a tendency to be very, pushy when it comes to, I don't care what your role is in HR. You need to go out and learn some other things in the business. Like, for starters, know where the business makes its money. How does the business make its money? Right. And how do you impact that?
Right.
Because I think a lot of times people get, into a role, and if they don't have a mentor, so to speak, somebody who's kind of shepherding them through their, life at work, it takes you a little longer to figure it out on your own sometimes.
Absolutely. I think one of the best experiences that I had, well, there were a lot that helped shape who I was, but one of the best ones was when I was at Honeywell, was, being in our Honeywell operating system for a year. of that, where I was straddling the line between HR and the business and help build out their change management around some of the continuous improvement initiatives that we were doing and that operating system. And being able to do that, and I think really being able to talk the language. I mean, that was feedback I would get all the time. They're like, Jen's in HR, why is she asking me about this process of manufacturing this widget? I'm like, well, because I see it in front of me, and I really think you could probably do this easier and more safely, right? So let me just ask you some questions and see if that's right, But spending a lot of time out on the shop floor, spending a lot of time, sitting side by side with all the employees, and really just kind of, to your point, right, understanding what is it that they do. And I think anytime you can do that, that's a win.
It's an eye opener, it really is. Or even just, something as simple as, if you're in benefits, obviously you do your annual enrollment as well, but going out and watching people go through this process, it's literally eye opening.
And then you're like, okay, why do we make this so complex? Right?
Yeah. Or TA, right? Recruiting, like,
yeah.
Oh my God, this is what somebody has to go through to apply for a job in our organization. Like, this is just terrible. Like, how do we fix this?
Right. Well, and it's funny that you use that as an example, because we literally just did a value stream map of our current state recruitment process, right? From I have a need through day one onboarding, and then the follow-up of that will be day one through year one of that continual onboarding of, all right, what are we doing to a great employee experience?
Yeah. How are you seeing, all the rage right now is around AI. I just came back from the HR technology conference, and, once again, that was the big topic. Although, interestingly enough, HR is really not heavily investing there right now, right? They're kind of in this wait and see mode. Like, how is it going to impact me? I think those that are getting ahead of it are going to have, a bigger impact. But just curious, for what are you starting to see, and is it, different? How are you seeing it in your organization? Because you're probably seeing it in the HR function, but also like in the business. How do we use AI to make us better?
Well, one, being in the space that we're in a highly regulated space, we've got to be careful with it. And so we actually built out Copilot internal for our business using our, all of our own information. So perspective, but you're still using it, right? You're still, I use AI all the time, even if it's a jump starter of a communication, where I can be like, all right, I want to communicate X, Y, and Z. It needs to have kind of this feel to it, right? Not having it do all the work for me, but just give me some ideas, right? And or put something in, like, if I write a communication, I'll put it in there. I'm like, please streamline, right?
Yeah.
All right, don't take this out, add this back, do this. And the time save on that is huge. You get a pretty good end product, but you have to actually, you have to coach it, right? You've got to ask all the right questions. And it's really important to make sure that you don't lose the intent of what your message was, because that can happen very easily. Something out and it's like, oh, here, it's this. And it's like, yeah, no, that's not what I wanted. Right.
Yeah.
And I think the other really helpful way, and I would highly encourage anyone to do this also, if you're using Perplexity, ChatGPT, and Claude AI, there's so many great tools that are out there. Sanitize information. Don't put anything proprietary in it. But if you're doing a presentation on, pick whatever topic and pick your audience, ask AI to what are the unintended consequences of this presentation? What are the pros and cons? What type of questions might I get from board of directors that have this type of background? What type of questions might I get from X, Y, and Z type of person? So it just helps you be prepared when you go in to give your pitch, and you might tweak something based off of some of the information that you get to say, "Ooh, hey, I should kind of actually that's a great con." Right?
Yeah,
I should really think about this, and is there a different way to position it? And it's been amazing. I actually even talked to our strategy leader about that before a board meeting, and I'm like, just ask it some questions, and he put it in, and he's like, "Oh my God, this was so helpful."
Yeah.
Right? different ways to use some of those tools to your benefit. But I think my biggest concern with that is people losing critical thinking skills, right?
It
I think
is. Yeah.
I'll use my nephew again as an example. I'm sure he would love this. He was starting to use a lot of different AI tools, and he's like, "Oh, this is a quick response, blah blah blah." And he's a super smart kid, right? He's put that aside now. He's like, you know what? I can write better than what AI is doing for me. I can think through different complex problems better than what it is doing for me. And so he started to play with it, and now he's just like, no, I'd rather do it myself. Which I'm like, good for you.
Yeah. Well, it can help jumpstart the thinking sometimes if you're not the best writer or you struggle with the words. But the reality is, I mean, it does start to take away some of that critical thought process. And then do you remember what you wrote because you didn't write it?
You didn't write it. Or did you remember when you had it do your resume for you and you went in for an interview and the person that was on
I did that.
Person that showed up.
Yeah, I didn't know I did that.
Hey, I'm amazing.
Yeah, I am amazing. Yeah. So did you train it on an internal cloud did you train it on some of your proprietary?
Yeah, it was our internal, using our internal data. Our IT team did a great job of really kind of building that out, and it's secure, and it's kind of proprietary to our business. But I've heard from a lot of my peers that are in either medical, other financial services, benefits, things where they'll tell you themselves, right, that they're not leading the pack on that. They are definitely wait and see, and it has more to do with the regulatory environment that they're in. And a lot of people out there that would love to have your internal information, right? Unfortunately,
this is true. Yeah. And there's a lot of things from an HR perspective that we don't need a human to necessarily do, right? To give you, tell you something that's in your benefits options, or to tell you, read something from the employee handbook or explain something from the employee handbook.
I mean, I'd rather free them up to be more strategic, to add a different type of value to the organization. So if there's some repeatable tasks that you could have a chat bot be able to answer for someone, using all those examples that you just gave on benefits, it's a great example of, hey, have them answer those questions. And then if it's something even that's more complex than that, absolutely reach out and let's help you. But I would, if you think about value add and non-value add, right? You've got non-value add required sometimes. So anything that's non-value add required, how can you use technology or a tool to solve for that, right?
Exactly.
So all your time on that value add.
Yeah. What advice would you give a new CHRO kind of walking into a similar situation, or just a new industry, new organization in general?
Just take a breath, right? Start with breathing, right? And just, I would just say be curious, right? Would be one of the most important things that you can do when you go into a new job. Be curious. Don't make assumptions that something doesn't exist. Ask if it is there, right? I mean, I think we all might be a little bit guilty of that. I know I am, where I'm like, I can't believe we don't have a process for that. And they're like, well, we do. I'm like, okay, I guess we have a process for that. I can't believe we don't follow this process.
Right.
But I seriously, it's really about, be curious, ask questions, listen. I mean, listening is probably the most important thing you can do right out of the chute, but then act, right? You can't let too much time go without not performing or acting, but find the people in the organization that you trust and that are going to be open and candid. And I'm a big fan of feedback. My mantra is feedback's a gift. You can't do anything with it if you don't have it, and then it's a personal choice.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, great advice. That's one of my favorites, is just curiosity. If you're not curious about what's happening in the organization, it's going to be very hard for you to think through and turn over the problems in the organization and help people solve them. And you can't solve them all. Like you need, the people in your organization that's why you hire smart people, right?
Right. That's right. Well, and I think, to an earlier question that you had asked just around going into a smaller organization, having come from larger organizations, sometimes you're working with people that have been in the same company their entire career, and then you come in asking questions and they're like, why are you asking me all these questions?
Yeah.
Right? Who are you to ask me? Who are you, right? To ask me these questions? And I'm like, because they've never had coaching, or they've never had someone come in with a different perspective, and trying to help everyone, regardless of the organization, understanding that what you're doing is coming from a good place, right? There's no malicious intent whenever you give feedback, right? It's really coming from a good place. And when you're asking questions, it's out of curiosity. It's out of really wanting to understand, so that, as we deploy things, we're doing it through the right lens.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Well, Jen, before we go, I want to say hi to Fredo. Oh, he's sleeping. Hi, Fredo. We love pets. Hello, Fredo. He's like, nah, this conversation is not for me.
He's like, I was so tired. No, Fredo is my bicolor. There you go. You can see him a little better
now. There we go. Now we
can
see him better.
Bicolor German Shepherd. He came over from Slovakia, so he's a mobility dog. I have a lot of metal after playing all my sports.
Yeah, I bet. He's beautiful. So you were a basketball player? Is that what you said?
I was. Yeah. I played basketball and in high school, and then I played field hockey and softball to offset seasons when I was playing basketball.
Yeah, I loved sports. Sports is a great way to learn, I think, leadership skills and things like that. I didn't play in college, but played intramural sports in college and things like that. But I played all through grade school and high school. Just being on a team was just, I don't know, there's just something about it. Learning from the coach, having other players, like wanting to get things done as a group, not just an individual.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, that's been my biggest life lesson. And that's probably been one of the reasons I've been as successful as I have been, is having played competitive sports pretty much my entire life. And, it's not about you. It's about everybody else that's on that team. It's looking for that open pass, or, because they're in a better position to make the basket, or, whatever the sport might be. But it's really around how do you bring up the entire team, right, to compete in a really healthy way. And I coached 7th, 8th grade boys for 9 years also. And that was a way I could give back when I couldn't play anymore after all my all my surgeries over the years. But it's pretty incredible. It's a nice gift to be able to give back as well.
It really is. Well, thank you for joining me today. This has been a great conversation, and I hope we can do it again. I want to thank our producers, Brand Method Media Group. I want to thank our marketing team who will get this out to you guys. And I want to thank you for tuning in. That's all the time we have for this episode of HR We Have a Problem. If you enjoyed it, you can subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app. Leave us a review or drop us a line, schedule some time on the website. Tell us what you want to hear about. We'd love to know more about what you want us to talk about on this show. And then we will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody.